Jacqueline Cabasso, Western States Legal Foundation. Maj Britt Theorin.
Jag tror att jag nyttjar med mikrofonen för det är lättare. Va?
Och det går inte ut på webben, precis om för den här ska vara så att om du...
Okej.
Jättebra.
Well, I would like to see you when I put my questions. My name is Maj Britt Theorin. I'm a predecessor of Alva Myrdal.
I know you. I have met you before.
Yeah.
I didn't recognize you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for your speech, because I have no disagreement with what you are saying. You are giving us quite a good facts to start our work with. And so there is no disagreement, but I have some points I would like to give you. You named Alva Myrdal, and she was a good advisor for me. She didn't want to give me advice, but she gave in any sense. And as you said, the connection between nuclear power and nuclear weapons is, of course, absolute. We know about that, but they try to take it away from us. When we had the referendum in Sweden about nuclear power, the politician made it to a play by not saying one yes and one no. They say one yes, one no, and one a little bit in between. 1, 2, and 3. And Alva Myrdal stood up, I did, on number 3, saying no to nuclear power and that we want to get rid of it, just with the argument, the connection with nuclear weapons. She was a very official person then, well known in the society. It was after she had left office. Our Prime Minister, Olof Palme, who in the end was a very big fighter against nuclear weapons. Yes. But he has, or somebody close to him, has constructed the number 2, which would give us the possibility to go on with nuclear power a longer term, but get rid of it in the end. Well, anyhow, he was upset, and I just will give you that quoting he said about Alva Myrdal. Well, it's no problem to sing with the angels. And this is, everyone knows about that. And this is something women always get when we take stand for something which we find very clear. We are always singing with the angels. We have to find some arguments against that statement only, but I would like to give you that. The other point I will tell you is that some days ago, when we had the conference in South Korea with all those men and not one single woman in the row, Carl Bildt announced that he had given the plutonium from the reactor, which was an experiment reactor, on 3 kilo plutonium to US. Yeah. It would be interesting to hear your comments about that. And fourth part is the Canberra Commission, which I was the only woman on board. We presented a realistic program of get rid of nuclear weapons. A realistic, because I noticed what you said about that some of the working turns the other way around when they modernize nuclear weapons. But the Canberra Commission didn't come at the right time. It came too early, I think. Still, this is the only realistic program of getting rid of all nuclear weapons. Hans Blix later on was chairman of a commission, but they only wanted to diminish nuclear weapons, and that's a totally different thing. You know. So I would like to hear your voice about that. And the last point is abolition, which was looked upon as a bit silly when it started by many. And then created a standpoint which is now taken care of by many. What is the position of today? How strong is the abolition movement? And is that something we can build on for the future? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maj Britt Theorin. I send around this so you can have her full speech. Give me your email. I have her full speech in my box. So just please hand it around. Please, Jacqueline Cabasso.
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm really honored that you're here. And I apologize I didn't recognize you. I think your hair is different than the last time I saw you.
Well, it's older.
No, but it's a different style. Okay, first of all, regarding singing with the angels. It's really interesting that in the United States, the positions that I've laid out here are very far outside of what's the mainstream arms control and disarmament that you would hear typically out of the groups that are based in Washington, D.C. For example, the parts that I quoted you from Obama's speech in Seoul, all I've seen is praises of the first part where he repeated his pledge from Prague. I haven't heard anybody pick up on the parts about the Atoms for Peace, which frankly were shocking to me, beyond what has come out of Washington in recent years. And as an abolitionist, I'm often accused of being idealistic and utopian, and yet I think I have presented a much more realistic view of the actual circumstances and conditions than I see most elsewhere. Something I didn't talk about here, just because it could have gone on forever, is the relationship between nuclear and conventional weapons, which I think has to be addressed. This is what the Russians call strategic stability. What they basically say is, what the Russians basically say is that nobody can compete with overwhelming U.S. Conventional superiority, and so they need nuclear weapons to compensate. In the U.S., and this is getting worse, because the U.S. is now planning this new conventional intercontinental ballistic missile warhead, which doesn't exist now. This prompt global strike thing was coming in. The target country wouldn't know if it was a nuclear or a conventional weapon, and if they had nuclear weapons, they'd probably use them. So in the U.S. you have some politicians, and you have many arms control groups saying the U.S. doesn't need nuclear weapons because of its overwhelming conventional superiority. That is a no-winner. That is not going to win, because that is going to give other states, nuclear states, a justification to maintain and modernize their nuclear weapons. In turn, that goes back to the U.S. Well, we can't give up our nuclear weapons because they're modernizing theirs, and it's a recipe for never getting rid of nuclear weapons. So that's another realistic, practical consideration we have to come to grips with, and nobody wants to talk about it because it's way too complicated. Ultimately, that gets to the notion of demilitarization and ending war, which sounds utopian and singing with the angels, but it's practical. It has to happen. Okay. Let's see, the Swedish plutonium going back to the U.S. I just read about that too. The U.S. in the 1960s and 70s, I think, had a program to promote research reactors around the world. And they provided those research reactors with high enriched uranium, which can be used to make bombs as well. And then in we worked on this a little bit. I think it was in the 1990s, the U.S. enacted a new program to replace the high-enriched uranium fuel with low-enriched uranium, which can't be used to make bombs without further enrichment. And this involved an exchange program where the U.S. was going to take back the high-enriched uranium and give the countries low-enriched uranium. We opposed that. My organization opposed that because it was more kind of rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. It was like, we said, no. First of all, transportation of this stuff is dangerous. That's a whole area in and of itself. Keeping it going is dangerous. And actually, low-enriched uranium produces more plutonium than high-enriched uranium if it's reprocessed. So depending on what the capabilities are of the country in possession, it was like, no, just shut down the research reactor programs and let's get on with a nuclear-free future. So, I read the article about the Swedish plutonium, and it kind of reminded me of that whole you know, it is not safe or smart to transport these highly radioactive fissile materials that can be diverted to bomb making. We get into the whole question of what do you do with it then? Another thing, stop making it, you know. Anyway, and then about the abolition movement. In 1995, I was one of the founders of the Abolition 2000 Global Network to Eliminate Nuclear Weapons. We were at the NPT Review and Extension Conference in New York. This was now in 1995. It was 5 or 6 years after the end of the Cold War. It was a period in world history when, I mean, the unimaginable had happened when the Cold War ended and the Soviet Union disbanded, and the presumed justification for nuclear weapons disappeared, although as it turns out, now we know that wasn't the real justification for nuclear weapons. It seemed like the moment, the window of opportunity for the world, for the United States as the first nuclear weapon state, to move decisively to eliminate nuclear weapons. And instead of that, the United States moved decisively to maintain the status quo. And in the period leading up to that NPT Review and Extension Conference, the U.S. conducted an 18-month campaign of sending ambassadors around the world, threatening and bribing countries, states parties to go for the indefinite unconditional extension of the treaty. Instead of, for example, I mean, there were other options. They could have gone for 25-year renewable extensions, you know, put some pressure on the nuclear weapon states to uphold their end of the bargain. Well, as an NGO that was there, and with other NGOs, oh, well, let me just say this. In the U.S., again, mostly the U.S., the mainstream arms control and disarmament organizations who were well financed by the philanthropical foundations working in the field, were conducting a parallel campaign, basically supporting the U.S. government's position of indefinite unconditional extension of the treaty. And so my group, with some others from other countries, said, you know, there's something really wrong here. Nobody's talking about disarmament. Nobody's talking about the Article 6 obligation, which obligates the nuclear weapon states to end the arms race at an early date and negotiate in good faith, and that has a specific legal meaning, the elimination of the nuclear arsenals. Nobody's talking about disarmament. So we kind of broke away from the arms control groups and wrote a statement, the Abolition 2000 statement, calling for immediate commencement of negotiations on a treaty to eliminate nuclear weapons within a time-bound framework, and also recognizing the inextricable link between the peaceful and warlike uses of nuclear technology, and calling for a phase-out of nuclear power. Very quickly, we had 200 or 300 organizations around the world signing on, and eventually we grew to be over 2,000 organizations in 93 countries. And so it is a global network. It is continuing. It is a network. I want to stress that, but it is functioning and active. What a working group took the statement, working with international lawyers and scientists and activists, and actually drafted a model nuclear weapons convention. That's a treaty. It was submitted to then Secretary General Kofi Annan, and who accepted it as an official UN document, translated it into the 6 official UN languages, and it's floating around the system. It was updated in 2007, again submitted and accepted, and has actually, in concept at least, been endorsed by the Secretary General now, Kofi Annan, in his 5-point plan. There have been all kinds of expression. It has really caught on as an idea, as a concept. There's also the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, which came out of some of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War chapters, which is campaigning for a nuclear weapons convention. There's the Middle Powers Initiative, which is sort of more, how shall we say, the diplomats and a little more mainstream types who are kind of, we're trying to talk to the middle powers, the countries that are maybe allies of nuclear weapon states. So there's quite a bit that's happened. It's the concept, I think, has definitely caught on with a certain amount of credibility. Mayors for Peace, who one of the hats I wear as North American Mayor of Mayors for Peace, is calling for actually conclusion of the Nuclear Weapons Convention by 2015 and abolition by 2020, which is, you know, not soon enough, actually. Hard to imagine it happening. So I think that conceptually there's a lot of support for it. But in a way, it's also very disassociated from some of the realities that I've talked about. I mean, I'm one of these people who can sit here and say abolition tomorrow, but I've just told you what some of the problems are. And I think it's only going to be successful if it widens itself a little bit and takes on some of these other more troubling questions, because these are the real, we really need to look, we've kind of, you know, we need a vision, and we've articulated a very good vision, we've articulated a way to get there, but we also now need to ask some of the hard questions about why is this so intractable. I mean, for God's sake, the Cold War ended, the whole world changed, and here we are. So who benefits? Nuclear weapons are not useless. I do not believe they're useless. I hate that argument. You know, they're used. Somebody's benefiting from them. If nobody was benefiting from them, they wouldn't be here. So we really need to get into some of these, looking at some of these structural issues, I think, in order to take the vision and make it real.
Is this what you want to say to us before the Non-Proliferation Treaty Conference now in Vienna? Because we haven't come to that. I would like you to end up with what kind. I will go there. I'm not sure if anybody here is going to Vienna about the Non-Proliferation Review Conference. No, it's not a review.
No, it's the first preparatory committee meeting for the 2015 review.
Yeah. I would like you to end up with some of the suggestions in front of the Vienna meeting.
Okay. The biggest, I see two main challenges with the NPT. I mean, on the one hand, you know, we hold it up because it's the only nearly universal international security treaty that obligates the nuclear weapon states to negotiate the elimination of their nuclear arsenals. However, the nuclear weapon states have done a pretty good job of completely decoupling nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament, and so the focus tends to be on non-proliferation and focusing on one country or another. You know, we're focusing on Iran now, but that's a very political decision, because if you look at a number of other countries around the world, you can see that they have similar capabilities, and so it's really a matter of intent. I'll name one. I mean, a country that I really like and that is taking a lot of leadership in nuclear disarmament is Brazil, which looks an awful lot like Iran if you look at its civilian nuclear program, the fact that it's hiding some of its centrifuges from IAEA inspectors. They say for proprietary reasons. They had a nuclear weapons program. They're a recent democracy. I mean, so you have to kind of look at the politicization of which countries are being singled out for scrutiny on that question. So one thing is that I think that we as civil society need to do a better job of is getting them more on track with disarmament, holding them accountable, what Alva Myrdal said, and not just accepting their assurances, like, oh, well, we're doing great stuff, not just accepting the START treaty on its face as a great disarmament measure. It's not. So that's one thing. Another thing is nuclear power. Now, this is an even bigger problem because lots of countries, lots of non-nuclear weapon states want nuclear power. They want nuclear technology. South Africa, which had nuclear weapons and gave them up, is the champion of civilian nuclear technology. They want to be the nuclear center of Africa, you know, novel uses for nuclear technology. And they hide behind this, you know, we have an inalienable right thing. Well, there's another provision of the NPT which allowed for peaceful nuclear explosions, Article 5. And that is effectively dead, no longer in operation, because everybody finally agreed that peaceful nuclear explosions were unacceptable because of the environmental consequences. So there's a precedent, we can say, that just because an article's in there doesn't mean you have to go abide by it. But that's a big problem too, that we need to really be much stronger and clearer about why the arguments, some of which I laid out here, why nuclear power and nuclear abolition are not compatible. Finally, this year, a very major point is the Middle East. And at the 2010 review conference, in the final outcome document, they called for a convening of a conference on a Middle East zone free of nuclear and other weapons of mass destruction to be held actually in 2012, which is this year. And this is supposed to bring in Iran and Israel and all the states in the Middle East. And Finland was appointed as the convener. And nobody has any information about if it's happening, when it's happening, and so on. And I'm actually going to Finland after this, and I hope to find out a little bit about that. But I think that a very important and useful thing for civil society to be talking about and advocating is convening a process to move towards establishment of a nuclear weapon-free zone in the Middle East as an alternative to a war against Iran.
Yeah, thank you so much.